Everybody, welcome back. Excited to have you here. I love, love, love these author panels. Definitely stick around. Here is the formal introduction. One of the biggest fears aspiring authors carry is the fear of negative reviews. What if people do not like the book? What if someone misunderstands the message? What if reviews are harsh, public, and permanent? That fear stops some entrepreneurs from ever starting the book they've been thinking about writing. But often the real issue is not the possibility of criticism, it's the lack of clarity before the writing even begins. When you know exactly who the book is for, what problem it solves, and how it connects to your expertise, the fear starts to lose its grip. You stop trying to please everyone and you start focusing deeply on serving the right leaders. That's one of the reasons I created the Author ROI Lab. It helps entrepreneurs think strategically about their book before they invest months writing it. We test whether the message is clear, whether the audience is defined, and whether the book is positioned to support meaningful business goals. Because when you know your message will resonate with the right people, the fear of a few negative reviews no longer feels nearly as important. If you're considering writing a book and want to approach it with greater clarity and confidence, you can schedule a complimentary chat at booklaunchbrainstorm.com to learn more about the Author ROI Lab. And now, let's meet today's panelists. With me, I have Kate Colbert, who wrote Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, a thought-provoking exploration of how colleges and universities must rethink their approach to leadership, communication, and student engagement in order to adapt to a rapidly changing educational landscape. And we have Nikki Green, who wrote Chameleon Mindset, creative ways to embrace change and build mental resilience to transform your career and life. An encouraging and actionable book that helps readers strengthen resilience and navigate transitions with greater confidence. Please join me in welcoming Kate and Nikki. Kate, I'm going to kick things over to you. This is a very specific audience for this book, and I had the pleasure of helping you organize and host the kickoff launch party for it. Tell us a little bit about sort of who is the ideal reader for the book Commencement.
So, as you might guess, Commencement was written for the higher education industry. So, the book was written for anybody who works in higher ed, so staff, faculty, administrators at colleges and universities, primarily in the United States, though the book has a fair amount of traction internationally as well. And it has a lot of interviews that are included that were international. The book was also written for anybody who cares about the future of post secondary education. So, folks who are adjacent to higher ed, so K-12 principals and superintendents, policymakers like governors, elected officials, et cetera, even at the local level, but as well as Congress and sort of state assemblies. And then, workforce developers, higher education consultants. And as it turned out, the book also ended up getting a lot of traction among other higher education prognosticators and journalists who write about higher ed.
Yeah, it's really interesting because this is almost like a community of people who have to make really big decisions, but they're not always in community with each other when they're making them. And you
Correct.
kind of widen the lens to include a lot more people in that conversation, like high stakes,
Correct.
but they're the boss. And like they don't
Yeah.
know what's happening. I mean, I was in Boston, living on a college campus when my wife was a director of residence life, and they were part
Yeah.
of like a sister schools. It was like 6 or 7 schools in the colleges of Fenway, and they did on a micro level some of that conversation and collaboration, but it was like dependent on who was there and the effort people made.
Yeah.
But there was no like grander conversation taking place. Like I
Right.
want to come back to this. I think it's
Yeah.
really interesting and
Yeah.
unique.
It's very siloed within the organizations, but you're absolutely right. Colleges and universities tend to think that nobody's quite like them, even though
Right.
there's 3 or 4,000 of those such institutions just in our country. Everybody thinks they have their own sort of secret sauce, and they don't often. I always say that higher education studies everything except itself.
Mm, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, Nikki, I'm going to come to you. Nikki, you're the author of multiple books, both fiction and nonfiction, but I know you love talking about this one in particular. So tell us about your ideal audience for the Chameleon Mindset.
It's great that Kate and I are on the call today because it's kind of this 1-2 punch. So chameleon mindset is for those people in transition with their life, with their career. There's actually a chapter called "I Graduated, Now What?" And so we talk about what exactly happens in those transition moments in our life where we don't have a roadmap anymore. There's also a chapter called "I Got a Job, Now What?" And especially right now in the age of AI, where a lot of people are being laid off from what they thought was this great career because they had the education they thought they needed, they're in this free fall area. And so it's really great to be able to reach those types of readers who may be in a transition that may not be of their choosing. They may have just been having that change thrust upon them. And I originally wrote this in the pandemic, but it's interesting to see how these times in life continue to come back around again. So the new ideal reader is those folks in this new transition.
The transition and resilience is never going to get old as far as because the pace of change has just gotten exponential. I remember asking my like 80 something year old late 80s grandmother years and years ago, like 20 years ago, what the best invention was that she'd seen in her lifetime. And it was the microwave. That was her answer. My dad said it was the fax because of the work he had been doing. It transformed the way he did business. Those sound like such quaint answers. The fact that there could be a single answer, like I can't point to a single thing in that way. Like the pace is relentless. So coming back to you, Kate, this book's been around for a little while and it's very different from the other book that you're usually on here talking about, Think Like a Marketer.
Yeah.
You're also a publisher, so I want to give that context. So you know a lot about the publishing space generally, and you were invited in by two other co-authors to participate in this, and they're the ones who had really had access to the research, but you had something they didn't. So tell us a little bit about the origin of how you ended up collaborating on this project as a person with publishing experience, and obviously you were keyed into and excited about the topic as well. So tell us a little bit about that part.
Yeah, so our meet cute was really interesting between me and my co-authors. And so Joe Salustio is a higher education expert. He was a VP at a university at the time that we met, and he had a podcast that had just started really taking off and doing really well called the Ed Up Experience podcast. And it was a podcast about higher education and hot topics, and they were bringing on interesting people at various roles at colleges and universities. And he had somehow bumped into these two guys, Alvin Freitas and Joe Salustio, had bumped into somebody who had published a book with the publishing company that I own. So I own several companies. One of them is a publishing company. And so he said, you should meet each other. So we have this call and they're telling me we have this podcast and we've interviewed, almost at that point, almost 100 of the interviews had been with college and university presidents. And they said, well, we think there's like a book in there. There's like what does the future of higher education look like through the eyes of college and university presidents? No one has interviewed this many presidents as we have. This is really interesting. And I said, this is great. Listen, I'm a higher education marketer. I've worked on the insides of colleges. I do a lot of consulting for higher ed. I just happen to own a publishing company. Yeah, how can I help? Have you started writing the manuscript? And they're like, oh no, well, like I don't have time to write a book. and I'm like, so what exactly are you talking about doing? And they didn't realize when they reached out to me that I was a higher education expert. They thought I was just a publisher. They had
Right.
no idea that this was my expertise. And so I said, what if we wrote this book together? And then it just like took off. So essentially they provided the intellectual property for the interviews. I ended up having to listen to about 150 hours of podcast interviews and going through the transcripts. And so the research work was massive. And then I have a background in market research as well. I also own Silvertree Market Research. So we did additional research with the higher education industry about the pain points that they were having and sort of what the future skill set of a university president should look like. So we did all of this research. And then I organized and sort of culled that together. And then the two guys each wrote tons of sidebars for the book. And among the three of us, we had massive networks to be able to launch the book in a really big and exciting way.
Can you speak for a second about the uniqueness of having original data in a book? Because I think it really does stand out in my mind, at least.
I think it's everything. So every single author that comes to us who's writing a nonfiction book, we talk to them about doing even a little bit of market research for their book. So first of all, you often have a sense of who your readership is, but do you really know what they want to know about your topic? Do you really know what they're struggling with, what their aspirations are, what their pain is? And if you don't know, it's our experience as researchers that 85% of the unknown is knowable if you will go ask, do a survey, do focus groups, do interviews, etc. So that's really important. Also, I can tell you the things that get me on stages and the things that get me featured in Forbes and the like the big stuff always comes down to the proprietary information, right? There will always be people who are going to write books on whatever topic you are writing a book on or have written a book on. But your stories are uniquely yours and your data is uniquely yours if you did the research. So, for example, when people say to me, but Kate, I mean, everything's fine at our school. I mean, I know we're small and the industry is contracting, and I can say 58% of all higher education leaders told us during our research that they believe their institution is in trouble.
Yeah.
Tell me that's not you, right? And so we were able to take a look at that, and our book actually has tons of infographics in it, and so my book binding is always broken, whichever one is not laying on my desk. I always break the binding right where I have all the infographics, because it's the thing that I have to hold up to a camera most often when I'm talking to someone. So yeah, proprietary research and a little market research goes a long way. I mean, even asking the right 6 questions on a survey can change the trajectory of your book.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to parse out this a little bit, and then Nikki, I want to have you weigh in. There's basic market research to make sure that there's an audience for the thing you want to talk about, and that they even know they have the problem. Like, that's my author ROI lab is solving that problem, because too many of the authors that I've met whose books are in the point of being formatted. So they're like, okay, Rob, I'm ready to talk about a launch. And then they'll talk for 12 minutes and not be able to tell me who their audience is in a way that I can help them go and connect with that. I'm not going to help you meet individuals. Like, who are the groups? Like, who are the associations? Who are the membership groups and organizations and identities and like roles in a company?
Yeah.
Like, they can't answer these basic questions. All of that can be avoided by some basic test your assumptions type of market research, and stop just thinking you know everything and write the book that you want to write. Write a book people are craving. But then there's the additional step of taking some data and actually infusing it into the book. Nikki, what are your ways of, like, because you're talking about also a topic that there's a lot of information out in the world about careers and next steps and guiding people through transitions and uncertainty. How have you positioned yourself to stand above the noise?
I'm a prolific reader. I read a lot. I usually finish like a book a day. And so what I've done with Chameleon Mindset is I took all of that reading that I love to do, which is actually quite eclectic. It's even taking science fiction references, pop culture references, and infusing that into the mindset that we're trying to teach people. And so that way it becomes a really fun read. My book has over 100 footnotes and references, and there's a whole bibliography behind the end if you want to go do that additional research. And sometimes people do, but it's funny that some people, maybe they've already read some of these books, and actually, we talk about a lot about how important it is to get reviews so the ideal reader gets this. I'm trying to reach the reader that hasn't read a lot of those books, that maybe won't go do that. And I actually have a really funny 3-star review that says, it was hard for me to keep reading because the information seemed way too basic and common sense for me. And it's okay, because those people have already done the research. They already went and read those bigger, thicker books. My book is to make it more approachable and really actionable for people trying to work on mindset. And that's the difference you can do with research, is figure out what people need to do and condense it into something manageable.
Malcolm Gladwell comes to mind. You'd be happy to know, as I think of your name now and think, oh, Malcolm Gladwell, Daniel Pink, like people who've translated really dense academic journal research articles into pop culture, like 10,000 hours. I don't know how accurate that reference is.
It's been debunked a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is still a point of reference now for all of us.
Right.
Like, I can say 10,000 hours. That's all I have to say. And we can start a conversation about, like, what does it mean to be intent on learning? Like, what does it take to become a master craftsman at a job? Like, what is expertise really? Like, it's a starting off point of a conversation that we all have a base level of knowledge around. And I wouldn't have access to that 10,000 hours phrase if someone hadn't taken it, like plucked it out of obscurity and translated it. And I feel like, Nikki, what you're doing is you're looking at the, you know, you have to always do when you you have to do the lit review. Like
Yeah.
you did the lit review of your topic, and then you synthesize information down and put it into your own spin. Did
Yeah.
you find that you like, do you have a spin, like a framework that you introduced, that you created? Like, is there something like my croissants versus bagels is not like new, like, approach the open circle, not the closed one, is not like a brand new concept for networking, but I had a different way of talking about it. Did you find that you were repackaging some of the material, Nikki?
Absolutely. So we use the acronym CREATE for creating a chameleon mindset, but each of the letters stands for another methodology that you probably read in a book. C is for creative adaptability. That one is a little lesser known, but R is risk tolerance. That's a very common thing that we talk about, but a very critical aspect in adapting to change. Growth mindset is a part of it. And we're talking about abundance and growth mindset to make the A and the T. We cheated a little on the acronym, but these are fundamental things where maybe you've read growth mindset through maybe Carol Dweck's work, or maybe you just learned about it through internet videos on TikTok, who knows, right? But how do we make those things approachable so that people can understand them? How do you combine those different theories into one kind of cohesive way to live your life and blend them together?
You're both kind of getting at something where people reading the book have varying levels of knowledge about a topic. So, Kate, on one hand, you've got people reading your book who are very deeply, deeply in the grind of higher ed, the movers and shakers who and they're busy. So you want to make sure it's super relevant to them and helpful. But you also know there's going to be people who are not as clear about all these nuances, and a lot of it's going to be like dense for them maybe. How do you decide who you are writing to? Like, because you might leave some people behind based on what you put in and what you don't put in will change how people relate to the material. And I imagine you had a lot of, like you said, 150 hours, you had a lot of content you could
Yeah.
have shoved in. Like, how did you define the audience for this book, even though in the beginning of this call you said, oh, it's like all this and this and this?
Right.
Like, you had a singular focus though at
Yeah.
the start. Did that focus change, and did that give you like a screen or a filter for how to think about what was in the book and what wasn't in the book?
So that's an interesting question. So I would almost argue that instead of defining the audience for the book, that we let the audience define what went in the book, which was the whole point, right? So we sat down and listened to these conversations that had happened on my co-author's podcast, and we looked through, the irony, of course, is our book was released the day before ChatGPT was hit the market. So we did not get to use AI tools to be able to help synthesize everything that was in those interviews. So I did all of that manually, and by really sort of reading through it and understanding it. So yeah, joke's on me. And but what was really interesting is that we went into this project saying we have very strong opinions about what's working in higher education, sort of what's broken in higher education, what it's going to take for us to do the right things for students, for higher ed to be more accessible, flexible, affordable, et cetera. And we want this book to be through the eyes of these 125 college and university presidents. So we're going to talk about what they want to talk about, even if we disagree with it. And so that was a really interesting experience for me to go through all of the interviews and say, wow, like 7 of these authors kept talking about this one, or 7 of these interviews, these presidents kept talking about this one topic. I happen to disagree with it, and I'm willing to sort of fight about it in the book. But our readers deserve to know that people leading these kinds of institutions strongly believe that X, Y, and Z. And so we let them tell the story, and then we essentially so it was I almost felt like Oprah when I was writing this book. I felt like I was bringing all of these people and putting them on a couch to be interviewed, and I was letting the audience hear what they had to say, and then I was doing all the color commentary as the lead author of the book, talking about, so then how does Dr. So-and-so's take on this sort of stitch in with what Dr. So-and-so at this other university is talking about? And then what do I think that means? And so now the challenge, of course, was when you write a book where sort of one voice leads to another voice leads to another, and my job was to stitch it all together with these beautiful transitions. if you had to take somebody's quote out of the book for some reason, we had 3 people who were involved in massive scandals before our book came out, but after we put them in it. And so we knew we had to take them out. And it was sort of like the second, you couldn't just take out a paragraph. It was like old fashioned Christmas lights where like one bulb went out and they all went out. And then the entire chapter just didn't work. And so we had to rewrite multiple major portions of the book over and over again every time somebody would be accused of some sort of misconduct at
Oh
an
my.
institution. And they kept changing jobs. And there's a list of all of the interviewees and their job titles and affiliations in the back of the book. So we kept having to update that. And so we finally got to a place where like, this book has got to go out now because something's going to change again tomorrow.
Wow. Okay. So part of I think why you were able to answer the question the way you did is because the data you were working with, the data set was enormous.
Yeah.
And it was at such a high level of the institutions. But then you were still had the role of sort of framing the conversation, and the intent was for other people in those roles. Like there are more than 150 university and college
Right. There's
presidents.
There's 4,000
Right.
in the United States. But here's the thing. If you work at a college and university and you're an English professor, or you're the head of student housing, or you work in facilities, or whatever your job is at a college or university, you probably don't have access to the president's office very regularly. And so you have no idea what kind of big decisions are being made. You have no
Mm.
idea what the health of institutions really look like from a financial standpoint. And so one of the things that the media really clued into when they wrote about our book when it came out was like, this was like having a sneak peek inside the president's offices of higher education in the United States in a way that no one else could ever have access to. We actually even had people reach out to us and say, I work at this university and our president is in your book, and he or she said things I have never heard them say. And I learned a lot by reading your book, because that's not something they've ever stood up and said in front of us. So yeah,
Wow.
so it was very interesting. So the book is for everybody in higher ed. And actually, I would argue, while I think the people who are most positioned to make the biggest changes are at the C-suite, people up, down, and across colleges and universities in the United States need a stronger voice, and they need to understand the business, because they're all focused on what their job is. And a lot of people who work in higher education don't understand the business of higher education. And we were hoping to teach them a little bit of that.
Nikki, when we were talking about this and we're thinking about like the audiences, like you mentioned earlier that you have some things in the chapters of the book that are about like graduating and getting your first job. So it seems like this is geared towards people who are getting started in their career versus other books that might be on like, 50 years old, laid off career transitions. Or were you trying to straddle both of these things? Like, how do you think about the career transition conversation in the context of this book? Or is that why you write 5 million books, right? Like,
That's why you keep writing, because
why
there's
you keep
always
writing.
something new. It's very interesting because originally I thought it was going to be these folks just coming out of university during the pandemic and really struggling with that change that was forced on them. And those folks came in as my clients. We helped them through those transitions, and they did the exercises live in the book. But a lot of the exercises that I have, I call them Karate Kid exercises, because it's like something silly that you don't think is going to give you that result, but it actually does. And I encourage them to do it with their family, to do it with their partners, to do it with their friends. And when they started spreading that message, they showed it to their parents. Well, their parents ended up being in similar transitions. They're now empty nesters. The kids are going off to college or off to work. And now I need to figure out what I want to do with myself. And so then the parents started coming in, doing the same exercises, reading the same book. So it created this natural new audience, just like Kate said, that they didn't intend to read it. But now seeing that next evolution, it still applies, because they actually have an even bigger time of, they've spent 20 years in a job with, expecting something consistent all the way through retirement. And now things are changing for them and they don't know what to do. Do I go back to school? Can I retool myself? Can I just get a coach? And do I want another job? Do I want to build a business? Lots and lots of questions. And those are the things we're researching now to help answer in the age of AI.
You make me think that there's unintended consequences of writing a book.
You
Like,
don't realize.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, book 1 begets book 2 and 3 and 4. But I want to go back to something Nikki said a minute ago that I think was really brilliant. And I think that other authors and would-be authors who are listening to this might really sort of appreciate, is that, you said, Nikki, something about the fact that you read dozens and dozens or hundreds of books in order to be able to write your book. And people are busy. And so one of the things that I do think that book readers are coming to authors for is that distillation. They want us to be a more human and thoughtful and expert sort of AI, right? Like they want us to be able to organize and tell them, here are the high points of all the things that people are saying about this topic. And here's my unique take on this. And here's how you can apply this to your life, your career, et cetera. And so they can go read your book and spend 6 hours, or my book and spend 8 hours, or whatever else, instead of spending hundreds of hours. And I think that that's really powerful. And I know when I'm shopping for a book and I'm buying a book, I love that, right? And for people who are going from, maybe they have a Substack or a blog and they've got tons of content out there, and they might say, well, why should I write a book? People probably read my content somewhere else, or they listen to my podcast. But what are the odds? This is the question we asked when we wrote Commencement. What are the odds that somebody really sat down and listened to all 125 of the president interviews on EdUp Experience podcast? Probably not. And they probably missed some of them. But we could write a book that told them the high points of what they've missed. And so I do think that a lot of times authors second guess themselves and say, do I really have that unique of a take on something? Or, am I just sort of reacting to what's happening in the marketplace in my area of expertise? And is that enough? And the answer is, if you are generous enough to take your hundreds of hours of research and your decades of your experience and expertise in what you do and distill that down into something that somebody can read in 10 hours or less, that is a gift to the marketplace. And yeah, please do it. People will appreciate it.
I will also now share that when I was writing my first book, which is about networking at conferences, croissants versus bagels that I referenced earlier, I actually refrained from reading other books about networking until after my book came out, because I had been speaking for many years by that point on this topic. I had many examples in my talk. I had presented and heard from so many audience members. I knew my content worked. I knew it resonated, and I knew that I had my spin, right? Like I had my way of talking about it. And I was nervous about accidentally co-opting someone else's IP, because, I listened to multiple habit books in the same January, like 2021. I can't tell you which like concept came from which book to this day, because they all like blurred in my brain. And I will sometimes reference one of the habits, like the tips, but I can't tell you which book it came from. And I was worried that it would be a little bit of that, like it would be a merging in my brain. So I feel like, there's different, I don't know if I had the right, I had almost, I don't want to say it was like a scared solution, but like, I just wanted to like put my mark in it. Like I want it to be mine. And Nikki, you went the other extreme where you were like, let's just see everything. But then you're like, well, now my job is distill across all of them. And much like what Kate was doing, you're also trying to track back the source, of who said what, and like the contradictions within a field too start to bubble up. And then you have to kind of address some of that, and then things keep changing. So Nikki,
Well, and both, can I say, Robbie, I think
Yeah.
both approaches are valid. So in fact, when I wrote my first business book, Think Like a Marketer, I did exactly what you did. So I said, first of all, I just didn't want, from a editing standpoint, I didn't want to have a whole bunch of footnotes. And, when I was studying, I used to be an English professor. And when I was studying literature at the graduate level, I studied under David Foster Wallace, who wrote Infinite Jest. And so he, I didn't want to write books the way David wrote books. I didn't want, tons and tons of, and so it was really important to me when I wrote that book that even if I was sort of citing somebody, I did it in a very casual way. Instead of like having a footnote, I would be like, I was once in the audience at the National Speakers Association and heard Robbie Samuels say, right? Because it's just true. It's just part of my story. And then I wouldn't have to put a footnote. And so I tried really hard to make that book very story-based and not research-based, even though I referenced a lot of other people and concepts in that book. And so, yeah, I do think that your approach was valid. And it just different goals, different audiences, different topics require a different take, I think. And I think they're all valid.
Yeah. And what I tried to do really is exactly that. And I tried to make it fun. After 25 years in Silicon Valley, I sat across from very popular people that people know on social media, but they know the persona. I knew the real person. I went to their kids' t-ball games. I, had wine in their cellars, right? And so I told those stories without saying the names, and I combined that with the methodologies that were happening in these big books. And it's funny because some of those biggest questions I get about the book is, was this when you worked at that place? Because I think that's that guy. And because they would look at my LinkedIn and they're trying to figure out the timeline, but I didn't put things in chronological order. I made the story, about this is what happens when you go to work. This is what happens when you're under a lot of pressure. This is what happens when things go right. This is what happens when things go wrong. How do you do the next thing? And so it's really fun to be able to put those kind of Easter eggs in there where I actually want people to kind of guess what's really going on, but be very clear on where I'm tying it back to something that's already published and people know. So.
Just to wrap up this part of the conversation, I want to say, going to what Kate was saying, what you were saying, Nikki. My first approach to writing a book was very fraught because my only prior writing experience for anything like lengthy were papers for school, and I had completed my master's in social work years earlier and never really enjoyed. Like I mean, I remember submitting a paper in college where like everything, including the conclusion, had a footnote because I didn't want to be accused of plagiarism. And I was like, I know nothing, like going in, I know nothing about this topic. So everything I put in this paper is something I learned from someone else. This is not original thought. So I was like, on this way, I was like, it's my original thought. But I did search out the origin story for some of the casually shared like truths about networking. Like there's some stat that was being thrown around, like about 80% of people get a job through someone they know. Like there's a stat that's out there, and people kept saying it was from LinkedIn, and I was like, that's interesting. I didn't know LinkedIn was in the business of running studies. Like, let me think about that. I dug up that it was originally someone's LinkedIn like article, like a news, like how you do like a newsletter article. It wasn't even newsletters before newsletters existed. It's an article. He interviewed like 20 people about where they got their job. The study was a study of 20 but everyone keeps citing that as their source. Like, but like for me, that was actually kind of a fun. It's like an archaeological dig, trying to figure out like where do these like proverbs come from that we like just say are true, and like is there anything in it? But we also sort of we believe a certain thing. There's definitely a little bit of we're taking the pill. We don't know whether it's actually the medicine or not, but we're still going to end up believing those truths. As we wrap up here, I wanted to ask about the Kindle Flash Sale, because the reason we're all here is because you've both participated in the Kindle Flash Sale, where a community of 50 plus authors get together, and for 4 days we cross promote all of our books for 99 cents, some for $1.99 due to the file size of the Kindle book. And it's a very particular type of marketing. Everyone comes to it with a slightly different vantage point. Nikki, you've, I imagine, done a lot of different marketing efforts for the books you have, because you have some fiction books and you have these nonfiction books, and like they're just, there's a lot of ways to get the message out. You've been a part of this for a few times. What are your thoughts about the collaboration that we've done, and how does it fit in the overall marketing effort you have for your book?
It's been really fun being a part of it. I think this is going to be like my 6th time of joining the fun. And I keep putting the same book in there because I want to get as much exposure as possible to that book. I talk about, Think and Grow Rich is over 100 years old. And that's kind of like one of those main mindset books. Why can't my book be 100 years old and still continue to get reviews and people listening and watching it, in all the different formats? Versus, my fiction books are more about like, how do you have some downtime? How do you just experience life and relax? And so you need a different marketing technique depending on what book it is. Those fiction stories may not last that long, or maybe this is a novella and it becomes a series like Brandon Sanderson and I have 75 extra books about it. So those are the things I think about as I do marketing, and I adapt as it happens. When I go in person, people don't actually want to read my fiction books. They want to read the nonfiction ones because the stories are funny and I seem like a real person, and that's what they want to get to know.
Yeah, you're really good at weaving stories in. I mean, this is where people who have a fiction history of writing have a little bit of an advantage, I think, over those of us who have an academic background. Like the story part maybe becomes a little easier because it's something you're thinking about all the time. I had to definitely, I had to like go back in and add story. Like I wrote out how to's, and then I was like, I need a story to demonstrate this and like fill in all the stories after. So it's just a different approach. Kate, how you're a person who knows a ton about marketing. So how do you think about the Kindle Flash Sale, and what are some of the benefits you've seen from being part of it?
Yeah, I mean, so like Nikki, I've participated in the flash sales that you've organized multiple times. I don't even know how many times I've done it, but it's always a blast, and I always have a slightly different experience, and I get to network with different people along the way. So interestingly, the book I always put in the flash sale is my first business book, Think Like a Marketer: How a Shift in Mindset Can Change Everything for Your Business. And there are 2 chapters in that book that actually make the argument for why the Kindle flash sale is a good thing to do. So I have a chapter called Be Known and Be Seen, and I have a chapter called Toot Your Own Horn. And it really is about sort of showing up to the right sort of networking opportunities and defining that in different ways and making sure that people are stumbling across you. Case in point for why this is important: just literally 30 seconds ago, my phone, which is laying on my desk, lit up. And it was a client of mine who I haven't heard from in a long time that says, I caught a bit of your live stream today on LinkedIn. So this conversation we're having right now is being streamed while we're recording it on LinkedIn. And a client who I haven't heard from in a while just sent me a message, right? So he saw me and it triggered something he wanted to talk to you about. For me, when I do the flash sales, it gives life to a book that's been out there for a while, but has evergreen lessons, and that nobody's looking at the copyright page to be like, is this book 2 months old or 3 years old or 8 years old? Nobody cares. If it's helping them and it's inspiring them or entertaining them, they want to read it. And so it always gives me an interesting sort of lift in awareness about my books. It helps me because I write on different topics, because I write about marketing sort of for all industries, but I also write about higher education and other topics. And then I run a medical nonprofit. I have people in my life who only know me for one of those thirds, right? They're like, oh, but Kate's a marketing PR person. Oh, Kate's a higher education person. Kate runs this charity for people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And when they see something out there about one of those other pieces of my life, it expands their knowledge of me, and it can deepen relationships, which I find really meaningful. Also, I happen to be working on second editions of my books. And when you see people paying attention to your first edition, it gets you excited about your second edition. It also makes you a little bit uncomfortable when you're like, oh God, like I wrote that 8 years ago, and this was pre-pandemic. Like, is there something I should, say differently now? And it sort of lights a fire under your sort of own feet in order to be able to get you kind of moving forward. So for me, it always, participating in the Kindle Flash Sales reminds me why I write in the first place. It reminds me that being an author is an important part of my identity, not just something I do, but someone I am. And it reminds me that nothing good comes until you do the marketing. You have to be out there. You have to be known. You have to be seen. You've got to turn on the camera. You have to have these conversations. You have to put your book on sale every now and then. You have to do the marketing. And it just so happens that a high tide floats all boats. So I love that the flash sale is not about individual authors figuring out how to do something interesting with their marketing. It's about dozens of authors coming together to figure out how to help one another and celebrate one another. And that happens to help the individuals too.
I will say the author support of each other has far exceeded and continues to far exceed like my wildest expectations of what this was going to be. And you two longstanding participants in this have seen that evolution. I feel like it was initially I'm going to give you my information, Robbie, and then you're going to do a thing for me. And now so many people who've been part of it are like, well, this is the third or fourth or eighth time I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it a little differently this time. I'm going to add on this extra level of outreach or visibility, or try my own hand at making graphics, or I'm going to do a different kind of publicity or promotion. I love the experimentation. I just sent out an email this morning with like some data points from our debrief meeting, and one of the authors like just stopped and recorded for me a video testimonial to use After seeing all that, it was like, oh my God, you give me so much data. I have to like write about how that data and experimentation is helping me fine tune my own marketing year round, because I don't usually pay attention. I don't usually notice what clicks are happening or not happening, and whether certain types of formats are working or not working, and things change. Like suddenly video was everything. So Nikki, any final thoughts on this topic now that Kate and I have chimed in?
No, I think it's the community is so important. I'm
Yeah.
very fortunate that here in Chicago, I belong to a group of writers. And so we meet pretty much weekly to talk about writing and to improve our craft. But most of them are fiction writers. So the thing I love about being a part of the Kindle sale is I can now meet more nonfiction authors. And not only do we support each other through the book portion of our business, but there's a lot of correlations to the rest of our business as well. And so we've done a lot of other collaborations outside of this, which continue to help us all grow, not just in book sales and reviews, but all the other pieces too.
Amazing. For folks who are listening, you can always go to kindleflashsale.com. If it happens to be during a campaign, you will see an amazing list of books. Otherwise, you will see the opportunity to either join a wait list or join the next Kindle Flash Sale, depending on when you're going to that link, kindleflashsale.com. As we wrap up here, any advice? So, Kate, I'm going to come back to you. Advice you give someone who's writing a book to help them grow their business. I ask this question every single time because there's always new things to share. And people listening in often are thinking about writing their own book. So what is something you'd suggest for them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say don't just jump into the writing, do the pre-writing. And so I always encourage authors to sit down with a blank sheet of paper or a blank Word document and ask yourself the kinds of questions that if you were going to, so whether you're going to be pitching your book to a traditional publisher or working with a collaborative publisher, or you're going to be self-publishing, imagine you're still want to write a really good book proposal, and ask yourself the questions and do kind of a free writing exercise and ask yourself, what is the purpose of this book? Who is it for? What's it going to accomplish? How is it going to serve my business? Answer those questions really clearly. Then ask yourself, what is the thesis of my book? What is my unique argument that I am making that I want people to believe and buy into if they read this book? Ask yourself, who is my target reader, and get really deep on that, and who are sort of ancillary groups of readers. Spend some time brainstorming on what are all the different possible title and subtitle combinations for this book, and why would different titles and subtitle combinations attract different readers, and which one serves you best. And then I like to sort of sit down and make a list of what are we talked about how we all have a unique approach to a topic. I like, when I'm working on a book, to sit down and just with bullet points, just a keywords, what are my top signature stories, right? So we all have signature stories in our lives and our careers. That time that you had that big blow up with your boss and you said that thing that got you fired, or, or that weird, like I have a weird personal story where in the middle of a snowstorm, I was going out to get the mail, and I didn't know that the little manhole cover over the water main shut off had been knocked off by the snowplow, and there was a hole in the street, and I stepped in it, and I my entire leg went into the street. So I was stuck in a manhole cover up to my hip in the middle of a snowstorm, and I didn't have a phone, and nobody could help me. That has not made its way into a book anywhere, but it's a story that's sort of uniquely mine, right? And so make a list of all of your weird signature stories and funny stories and things you're proud of and things you're embarrassed about, because that list of stories will help trigger ideas as you're writing. And then make a list of what resources do you need to be able to finish this book.
Wow.
And so I always like to, so if you've got blog posts, go back and mine them. Do you need to do a little bit of research, which we talked about today? Do you need to go interview some people? Do you need to read some more books from your competitors in your space? What resources do you need? And maybe it's just that you need time. And one of the things that I do when I write a book is I put myself in what I call writer exile. So I stay at a local hotel that is about 3 minutes from my house. I book it over and over and over. I spend a crazy amount of money on hotel rooms, and I go and I write, because if you are paying for a hotel room, you will not sit around and watch TV or play with your phone or doom scroll. I also typically take 1 or 2 cruises while I am working on a book, and I will sit. I wrote the last 58,000 words of commencement while I was looking at Cabo San Lucas, but never got off the ship and did all that work. So do whatever you have to do. So if focus and accountability, those kinds of things are things that you need, engineer it. So you need to create the conditions. Nikki's book is all about creating the conditions to be able to really thrive through all of your life's transitions. Writing a book is its own life transition. Becoming an author is its own life transition. Create the conditions to be successful and do that, and doing that, and then be really clear about what you're trying to accomplish, and make a spreadsheet for how you're going to measure all the metrics.
Okay, everyone listening, you're going to rewind a little bit and write all that down. That's also a lot of the material that we're covering in the Author ROI Lab. So thank you for the pitch. One thing I will say is that you have to talk to your ideal readers. If you cannot get 5 of them to book a call with you, you don't know your audience. Like small, tiny litmus test, but like if you're writing a book for astronauts and you don't know 5 astronauts, you are not writing a book for astronauts. I'm so sorry. No one in that world is going to pay any attention to you. Nikki, advice you would share for folks who are writing a book to help them grow their business?
Well, last time we talked about how I'm an avid endurance athlete and also coach. And we talked about writing a book as a triathlon. And last time we said, well, writing is the swim and try not to drown in the emotion, which was definitely a good tidbit there. But what I want to say, since we're kind of focusing on the marketing today, is the marketing is the run. It's you think you're done and you get off the bike and you hit the ground. And now you actually have to get moving, really moving. And so in order to get to that finish line, the marketing has to be done, no matter how hot it is, if it's raining, if you're stuck in a pothole in the snow, all of it has to keep moving forward. And so it's thinking about that long end to the finish line, not just the writing itself. And if you have that whole picture, then you're going to win the medal in the end.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's training for all 3 legs of the race. You can't just be an excellent swimmer. My kids were just in a student triathlon this past weekend. They did great, right? But they couldn't just train for the swim and then leave the rest to chance. You can't be like, okay, no, I understand to bike. I'll train for the swim and the bike, which is what most people do. They get to the publishing section and then they're like, I'm good, right? And you're like, no, you still have to run. Like you have to plan for the endurance through the whole thing. And you might need different types of coaches, different preparation for each leg of that. But you also don't start thinking about that run portion when you get to it. You have to be thinking about it when you're planning to be even signing up for the whole thing. I think that's the part that most people are like, that's why I'm pushing back on the whole, like writing a book is like running a marathon. Cause I'm like, no. At the end of the run, marathon runners get to stop at the end of the finish line. Like they only have to plan for one activity. Yes, it's a lot of one activity, but I don't, yes, sometimes books are a lot, but like there are phases. Anyway, you're on my.
Yeah, no, writing a book is a lot more like having a child, I think, right? Like,
I love this
the birth is the beginning and not the end.
Right. Yeah. And also, I guess in that comparison, I really dislike when an author is asked within like minutes of their first book coming out when the next one's coming out.
I've had people do that to me at launch parties and I just want to throat punch them.
I know. I threw the screen. I'm like, no, listen, you give a parent a year of being a parent before you say, are you going to have any more children?
Exactly.
Like give them a year for that to like fade a little bit in their like reality in their brain. Oh my gosh. You two are amazing. I love when super knowledgeable authors come on and you get to share so much. Everyone should pay attention to what you're doing. So Nikki, how can people find you and follow your work?
The NikkiGreen360.com. You can watch me dance on TikTok, read my books, or hang out for the podcast, whatever works for you.
That's fantastic. And it's going to be the NIKKI Green GREEN.com. And Kate, how about you? How can people find you and follow your work?
I do a lot on LinkedIn, so I encourage people to connect me on LinkedIn. I'm there simply as Kate Colbert, and you can find out more about my books on Amazon or anywhere books are sold, or visit commencementthebook.com and thinklikeamarketerthebook.com.
Fantastic. We're going to put all these links in the show notes at bizbookpubhub.com, which is where you find the show notes for all the other 500 plus episodes of podcast interviews that I've done. We also host free virtual networking events every month. So you can check out hanging out with speakers one month and with writers and authors another month. And that Venn diagram is pretty much a circle. So hang out with us every single month that you'd like to. We have a new blog that we just kicked off. The Kindle flash sale information is there. Information about how to book a call with me if you want to have a chat. So many good details. And of course, our hub partners who are there to support you wherever you are in your author journey, writing, editing, publishing, launching, and marketing. Panel, thank you so, so much for your support today.